every spring, the juniors at NRC apply for internships as part of their coursework for their senior year. Well, wouldn't it be interesting if the school hosted a career day before these students made their final decisions, so that they could better understand the types of jobs they'd be getting into? Unfortunately, Crowley isn't interested in organizing such an event, but today I'm going to take it upon myself to match up each NRC student to the career or job I think they'd be likely to pursue in the future, an idea that was suggested by one of our lovely Discord members. Speaking of, if there's something you'd like me to cover, feel free to drop a comment or make use of the server's suggestion channel. I can't promise I'll make a video about it, but I will do my best to be accommodating. Now then, since we're discussing the future, everything in this video will be headcanon and theories informed by the canon, but because of this, there will be discussion of EN server story content, so this is your spoiler warning. Now then, let's peer into our crystal ball and see what kind of future awaits our buddy Grim. While Grim claims that he will be the greatest mage in the world, I can't help but feel that he's going to end up as a professional mascot. The dude craves praise and attention, and what could be better for him than the glory that comes from being a station cat or a similar mascot? He could be adopted by a library or something as their official mascot where he could live out his dream of stardom safely. I don't really know where he's going to get on the magic front, because as it stands, he really doesn't study or put effort into his magic. He tries to cut corners, get away with doing less than his best, and it's unfortunate because even the head mage recognizes that Grim has talent. He's just not cultivating it. Maybe in the position of official mascot, he could throw out some fireworks at official events or dazzle guests with some minor magic or something along those lines. I imagine this could work well for him, and he could still be considered a great mage, just not quite in the way I think he was initially envisioning. Does this mean that Yu works at the train station, library, or other assorted location? Maybe. Yu's future is so up in the air because of the going home thing, and I do think that if it comes down to it, Yu will leave, because throughout the story, this aspect of their character has been consistent. So I think Grim would be finding a new tribe at whatever establishment he's representing, and while those relationships wouldn't be the same, they would still provide him with support and love, and I think that's still good. Now, Riddle is quite the smarty pants, so I imagine he'd do well in any complicated field. However, given his mother's influence on his life and where I think at least she wants him to go, it's likely that Riddle will enter the medical field. However, I don't think he'd be a doctor per se, but more of a medical professor. He's got the strictness to keep his class in order and the knowledge with which to teach them. We can see various instances of Riddle tutoring his fellow Hearthstone students in a few different vignettes. He helps Deuce out with some math problems, Cater with a test, which, by the way, is above Riddle's grade level, and he gets on Ace's case fairly often about studying, which isn't tutoring specifically, but it's still necessary mentorship. I really can't envision Riddle being in a career that doesn't involve teaching in some capacity, and I think he mentions at some point that he'd like to be a medical mage or do something with medicine, so blending the two together I think works quite well. Also, I think he might want to become a teacher as a way to ensure that the strict upbringing and study schedule he had to uphold as a child isn't imposed on others. It might be a bit of a stretch, but I can see him counseling students fairly well in personal matters and assuaging their stress about studying since he himself has been a victim of its extremes. I had a math teacher in high school that would always tell us as he was passing out tests that they were simply just tests, and to not worry too much about the result. I can see Riddle eventually coming to share this same sentiment in his career too, although I guess with medical tests they kind of are more than a test given that someone's life could literally be on the line. But I do also think that medical school is ridiculously stressful and that Riddle, regardless of what the specifics are, would have ways to help his students not worry quite as much, or at least handle the stress a bit better. Anyways, moving on to Trey. Trey's career seems pretty cut and dry to me. As the eldest son in his family, it's likely that he'll end up taking over the family bakery, and this matches well with his motivations up until this point. Trey joined the science club in order to better understand agriculture for the purposes of baking, even going so far as to specially breed some strawberries for his tart. During the internship selection at the beginning of Book 7, Trey also picks one that is in this vein as well, so he seems very motivated to elevate his baking. There would be very little reason for him to do these things if he wasn't going to take over the family bakery or start one of his own, and I think it's a good decision on his part. Other characters often sing praises about Trey's baking, and even Azul is keeping his eyes on Trey's sweet creations, solely for research purposes, of course. But I think that speaks to just how valuable Trey's talent here is. To do something that you're not only good at, but that you also love is a very blessed position to be in, so Trey should count himself lucky. However, I don't think the bakery would be his only pursuit. I also think he'd be a part-time dental assistant too, for two reasons. Firstly, he loves dental care and is so strict about it that I can just see him being interested in a career where he gets to explore this interest. Secondly, this would also let him keep tabs on the town's kiddos' sugar intake and their tooth health. I imagine I'd feel a little more guilty about eating sweets if I was buying them from one of the people cleaning my teeth at the dentist's office. Would this make Trey seem hypocritical or sus? Absolutely. But at least he'd be cornering both the supply and demand of those markets, so he'd be in a win-win situation regardless. For Cater, I think he'd make it big in a band of some kind, maybe even a rock or punk one. Those genres seem to match his vibe to me, although I can also see him being in a boy band initially and then riding that wave of popularity for a while. Cater's in the pop music club, so he can play at least one instrument, and I have no doubt he could write songs if he put in some effort. He's also personable and extroverted, so he'd likely have no trouble forming connections, however superficial, with fans, and I also think he'd do super well in interviews. This sort of career would also get him out of the house and away from his sisters that he doesn't hate per se, but they do have a strained relationship, or at least that's how it seems from what he tells us. Most importantly, Cater understands marketing and social media trends. With this, he could 100% start a Magicam trend or a TikTok-y equivalent appy trend, audio that picks up steam and launches him into stardom. I think if he were to focus on his own talents and stop worrying about his social media metrics, he'd probably do super well in this career or just generically as an influencer. You don't exactly need good grades or a college degree to become a popular figure, and some of my favorite musicians, to my knowledge, never pursued that sort of higher education, yet they're huge in their spheres, so Cater's middling grades won't be a problem there either. I don't know, he just strikes me as the type to have enough charisma, thought, and know how to really make something of himself in this realm. As long as he doesn't get caught up in his ego, which doesn't really seem like a problem for him, I'd wager he'd be pretty good at it. Deucey Goosey now is going to be a magic marshal. Woo! He's got the drive, determination, and I think he's legitimately honing the skills necessary to land this job. Deuce talks about this career path quite a bit during his Star Sending Robes vignette and also in the Wish Upon a Star event, so we have a lot of canonical effort for his pursuit of this job. It's just whether or not he gets it that's up in the air. Since it's his dream to become part of this elite force in the future, I'm envisioning I'm going to give it to him. Now, I do think it will take multiple attempts for him to pass the test, but once he does, it's going to be such a cathartic moment, and I love that for him. The other thought I had in this hypothetical situation, where he doesn't get picked for this role no matter how hard he tries, is that he maybe, potentially, could get recruited as a ferryman for Styx. Now, in Book 6, we find out that most of the people employed by Styx have small magic pools, if they have one at all, so technically speaking, Deuce shouldn't be a candidate. However, the ferrymen are the elite force that gets sent to battle and capture phantoms. In this role, I can see Deuce's special magic coming in super duper handy, plus he's got a lot of battle experience to boot. So I think he'd be really good at field strategy for these situations. We get to see how effective his unique magic is in an overblot situation firsthand during Book 5 with the Vil confrontation, and even in Glorious Masquerade with the Rolo confrontation, even though that technically isn't an overblot. So it could definitely be put to good use by Styx. The Charon suits are currently designed to absorb magic, however, I also think that Idia or his mom could easily make one that's special for Deuce to let him use the spell. So if he's not a magic marshal, maybe he's a ferryman. But in either role, I think Deuce will find fulfillment in helping others. Ace, on the other hand, has no special magic to speak of currently, and he doesn't really seem to have a clear focus on what he wants to do in the future either. Charlatan isn't really a career path, so I guess I'm going to be kind here and put him in the street performer box. Ace is adept at sleight of hand magic, and he can chat anybody up about pretty much anything under any circumstances, as we can see in Book 3 when he approaches the Merman Guard, in Playful Land when he puts on the act for the puppets, in his ceremonial robes vignette when he's talking to Epel, and so on and so forth. I think he could make a compelling performer if he were to couple this with the skills he already has, and if he puts effort into this, he could become a rather famous performer. Maybe he'll get booked for Ren fairs, or conventions, or children's birthday parties, who knows? But I think the world could be his oyster if he put in the effort. Maybe he could even have Cater help him with the marketing. Just a thought. Now for Leona, I think it'd be very likely that he would take up some sort of governmental position, albeit begrudgingly, because I can't see a future where the royal family just lets him be a deadbeat. I think Leona truly cares about him. There's just a lot of miscommunication and misinterpretation going on between these guys at the moment. But because of this care, I can't see Leona being abandoned or left to rot. So instead, given what Leona chooses for his internship, I can see him becoming the Sunset Savannah's Minister of Mining, or whatever equivalent title makes the most sense for being the guy who oversees everything mining related. Leona does have a point when he's talking about his homeland, a place that has a wealth of resources that doesn't want to use them because of tradition. However, these statements are made by Leona, who isn't going to be the most reliable narrator regarding his homeland due to his issues. I think making use of these resources could be beneficial, but it's gotta be done right and with the right mindset. It is so easy for mining operations to turn catastrophic. An entire town can be wiped from the face of the earth in less than a day if the mines beneath it collapse. People can get poisoned rapidly by heavy metals if mine refuse isn't properly dealt with, and the work conditions can be super hazardous for the workers in the mines too. Modern mining is comparatively much better in that last regard, but still, it's a very complicated operation, and I have no doubt that Leona has the smarts and cunning to effectively and safely run these sorts of things. He does need a little push and a bit of an attitude adjustment, but I'm hopeful that he'll get there, and I do think he cares enough despite his internship proclamations to make some positive progress in this regard. So that's where I currently see his future heading. Now, Ruggie I can see becoming a pawnbroker because this guy is used to reselling whatever he can find for cash. At least this is alluded to in Book 2 when Ruggie makes a comment about some of Leona's belongings being his to snatch, and in the beginning of Playful Land when Leona tells Jack to hush lest Ruggie catch wind of the all-inclusive tickets and their resale value. I think Ruggie probably already has contacts in the Sunset Savannah that he could sell things to, even goods that may or may not have been obtained legally. Therefore, I think owning a pawn shop or working at one suits his current talents while also providing him with an opportunity to make some extra cash from time to time. There's also an argument that could be made for Ruggie to be employed by Leona later on, but I'm not entirely sure that their relationship is that deep. Yes, they seem like buddies, but Ruggie is also only helping Leona for the perks, and Leona is letting him do so for separate perks. As long as Ruggie is useful to Leona, he will keep him around, but I have a hard time kind of figuring out the form this symbiotic relationship would take post-graduation. Perhaps Ruggie's pawn shop could also act as a base of operations for Leona to keep his fingers to the pulse of the common folk. In a way, justify his mining proposals, given that they should be benefiting those common folks. I'm not quite sure that this would work in the way that I'm envisioning, but it is a possibility nonetheless. However, I feel like a pawn shop base fits Ruggie and his general vibe, so that's where I see his future going. Jack, though, is hands down totally going to be a professional athlete. Dude is so jacked and so impressive in these physical pursuits that it causes beef from day one with some of his upperclassmates, like we get to see in Leona's dorm uniform vignette. We also get to see in that vignette that Jack has great sportsmanship and conducts himself respectfully with regard to his friends and foes alike. He's got integrity, which is rare these days, sure, but I think it's also an important quality for a pro athlete to have. Jack is constantly pushing himself to be the best that he can be, and I do think there's a bit of ego there, and while he is to an extent a lone wolf, I don't really see him having trouble in team sports. Like, I just can't imagine him being the type to try to take glory from someone else, or get in others' ways to be able to score points for himself. That's just not in his personality, and that's a great thing for professional sports. There are some that aren't team-based, but I think Spell Drive specifically is where Jack is likely to end up, as I can see him getting recruited during his sophomore or junior years from the inter-dorm competitions since Malleus will no longer be in play, and I can't imagine whoever the house warden ends up being in those times not letting Jack onto the team. That would be incredibly stupid on their part given the everything about Jack, even if they don't like his goody two-shoes attitude. So I think it's quite likely for Jack to take this job. He can also continue to push himself and train as a pro athlete, and I think that would also appeal to him if nothing else does. Azul's basically already set for the future, though. Dude is likely to be able to retire early, honestly, although I don't think that he will. The guy is too invested in his little lounge and business generically to sit back and let the days go by. His motivations haven't shifted enough for him to be content with being able to retire before 30, not at all. And while I think he will absolutely be in a position where he could retire, I think he's going to continue to grow the Mastro Lounge until he takes his final breath. Not only that, but I can see him creating an even more upscale luxury sister brand, and maybe even a family-friendly one too. He may even become one of the sharks on Twist's version of Shark Tank, for all I know. But what I know for sure is that he's going to pursue business and business-related matters with gusto, and he's going to do fantastically. I do think that going forward, he's going to keep most, if not all, of his actual companies and projects above board. At least that's my hope, anyway, given all that he's learned at NRC. But even if he doesn't, as long as he continues to entertain Jade and Floyd, he'll likely be okay. Hopefully, Azul won't become too greedy and become the source of his own ruin, or get crossed by those who have gotten bored of him. It is a risk, but in my little headcanon-y world, he's going to do just fine, heal, and enjoy his life and his franchises. So, Jade. I cannot envision Jade doing anything but taking over the family business. However, I have no idea what that business is, but neither he nor Floyd is going to tell me. So whatever it is, he's doing it and doing it well. Jade has the best temperament, I think, of the two to do this, and he's going to be way more consistent than Floyd, which I think is required to run a business or at least run it well. The specifics aren't something that I can speak to given its secretive nature, but we do see Jade's customer service expertise in full swing in various story beats, including his very own dorm uniform vignette. These types of skills can be transferred over into literally any field. Like, if you've never worked a customer service job before, I highly recommend you do so. Not only will you gain an appreciation for what service folks have to go through and do, but you'll also have a bevy of skills at your fingertips that you can apply to literally any situation. It's certainly worth the pain, I think. Anyways, Jade is going to do just fine in whatever business it is. He's already got the contacts necessary to make things happen, and I'm sure he'll have the support of his family behind him too. He's competent, a bit ruthless when he wants to be, but overall very cunning, so I'm sure he'll be fine. Floyd, on the other hand, has a very specific job that doesn't really have a title, I guess. Maybe entrepreneur, but not like in an Azul way. This dude is absolutely just going to be a loose cannon for the rest of his life. I don't really foresee him mellowing out too much, even if he eventually settles down, and he's absolutely going to be involved in the family business somewhat. However, I think his defined career is likely going to be Smoothie Man. I cannot get this idea out of my head, and I think that it would just work for Floyd somehow. Imagine with me for a moment a little beachside shack on a tropical island that sells fresh fruit smoothies and other drinks to tourists and locals alike. Now, what if I told you that these smoothies were the best thing you were ever going to consume, made from the freshest fruit you could imagine, that you will just crave them forever onwards? What if I then said that there was absolutely no discernible way to know when the shack was going to be open because the guy who makes the smoothies only does so when he's in the mood? Yep, that's Floyd's career, the smoothie guy. I imagine given how he gets super invested in things that pique his interest that he may, every once in a while, just get a hankering for smoothies. And on a whim, he decided to open the shop that now, because of his inconsistent ways, has a cult following and people that just watch it to see when he arrives. The business is kept afloat purely on this scarcity, and Floyd's just happy that people seem to like his drinks when he's there. Unlike Floyd, Kalim's future is pretty much set in stone. he's going to follow in his father's footsteps and become the head of his family. This will inevitably lead to him being a diplomat of sorts, given his family's influence in the region, and hopefully by that time he'll learn to be a bit more judicious with who he keeps in his inner circle. If he were to become leader as he is now, I would be a bit scared for the future of the Scalding Sands. But he is on track to be a little less oblivious, so that's good. If he somehow wasn't going to become the head of his family by some wild occurrence, then I think he'd do good as a conservationist. It seems like Kalim really loves animals, as we can see him kinda sort of managing various parade animals in his dorm uniform vignette, although that doesn't go over quite well. But we also get to hear about his childhood exploits of freeing various animals from the family zoo for their happiness in the Fireless Skies event. With a bit less impulse and a bit more focus, I think he'd be likely to do well championing conservation efforts. I can also see him doing fantastically as one of those school assembly animal people who bring in a bunch of different animals to educate kids on conservation efforts. Something like that suits him, I think, especially since he loves his younger siblings and has a great interaction with Cheka in the cloud calling event. Maybe this sort of thing would be even less stress for Jamil. Maybe not. I'm not sure. But regardless, I think Kalim will do well of these pursuits, either becoming the head of his family or becoming a conservationist, or maybe both. But regardless of whether or not Jamil is allowed to step out of Kalim's shadow in the future, I think he'd make an exceptional spy. He's already got the work ethic and aptitude for this line of work, and he's likely already has a lot of defensive training in his current position protecting Kalim. Jamil's special magic is also something that I can see government salivating over, and I don't remember if we ever get an answer about how these things are regulated in universe. You may have to obtain a special license or something, or report the specifics of your abilities. I don't quite know or remember if this was discussed in the game or just on a stream, but I can see a government entity intentionally allowing this information to be hidden if Jamil works for them so that he could use it on his little spy missions. He may have to stay by Kalim's side in a Perry the Platypus type way, leaving to take care of business, then coming home to take care of Kalim, which would be a lot of stress, but I do think that Jamil is capable and would be able to handle it, and if Kalim reins in some of his negative qualities, then Jamil might have a bit more breathing room for his tasks. I could also see him getting recruited and being taken out of his servant role to become a spy, though I think his ties to the Assims would gain him better access to foreign diplomats, so perhaps that wouldn't be the case, but no matter how it comes about, I definitely see Jamil becoming a spy. Similarly, I can't envision Vil as anything other than a megastar given his desires and current career trajectory. Vil is dedicated to getting his handprints in the Queen's Film Studio Walk of Fame, and I have no doubt that he will be pursuing this goal with all of his energy. I think he'd like to get out of his typecasting, however, even within villainy, I think he could become a legendary figure in film. And not only that, Vil has talents for modeling, dancing, singing, pretty much every other aspect of the entertainment industry. He's already got it kinda covered, so if he ever decided to branch out of film, he could do that too. Vil is also likely to have his own brand of cosmetics somewhere down the line as well, since he's rather apt at creating potions and other skincare remedies, and celebrities often do this, I think, to diversify their portfolios and secure their wealth, so I imagine Eric might have also had his hand in this pot at the present moment. So Vil going into cosmetics and being involved in brand collaborations and those sorts of things just makes sense. But his most prominent venture, of course, will be stardom within the movie sphere, and he's got the tenacity to achieve greatness there. Rook now, I imagine, will be a professional photographer. However, I do not think that he'd ever be one for the paparazzi. If his time with Vil has taught him nothing else, he's at least learned about the importance of consensual photography, at least when it comes to the photos being released to the public. On the other side of the coin, I can see Rook becoming a vigilante against the paparazzi, capturing photos of them like they do for celebrities, and sending them those photos as a warning. Is this legal? I don't know. But Rook's got the talent to hunt whatever query he desires, and if that query happens to be a member of the paparazzi, there is very little they could do to stop him, I'm sure. Actually, now that I think about it, Rook is much more likely to become a private investigator or bounty hunter. He can track down anyone with anywhere with his special magic, but even without it, he's great at spotting and pursuing his quarries. It would also allow him to use his talents legally and stalk his quarries legally, which might be beneficial for him given his current pursuits. I also think that there's a bit of heroism in these roles when they are in the right context, like, for example, the investigators who work with Chris Hansen. And I think Rook is heroic-leaning enough to find some real fulfillment in that line of work when it is in those contexts. Which, also, I guess this line of work does involve photography to an extent, depending on what you're doing, so I guess professional photographer, bounty hunting private investigator would be Rook's official title. A little bit of a mouthful, but what are you gonna do? Epel's totally gonna be an apple farmer, though. There is no way he doesn't spend the rest of his days in his hometown improving the agriculture there. Epel has so much pride for Harveston and has such a desire to improve the town that I just cannot imagine him doing anything else. He's also one of the very few youngsters that lives there, so I can see him putting in a considerable amount of effort into revitalizing the town and drawing in folks to live, work, and otherwise contribute to this. I even think he'll be so prolific that he'll breed his own special kind of apples with his efforts, and perhaps those apples will become super duper popular and also contribute to this revitalization goal. Maybe it's a breed of apple that they don't export due to limited quantities, so if you want a taste, you're going to have to come to Harveston. I think that could work out quite well for him. Now, Idia is a bit of a special case because I don't really know that he'd become director of Styx at this point in time because Ortho now exists again. And I think it would make way more sense for Ortho to learn and take on those duties, but we'll get to him in a second. Right now we're talking about Idia, and if he were to forego the director role, I can only ever see him becoming the leader of a tech conglomerate. We already know that he has apps, startups, and other tech-related projects going on, and he even gets an internship offer for Olympus Tech, the biggest in the biz. While I don't think he'd be able to take over this particular company, given Hades and Zeus's respective roles, I do think Idia could easily create a more thematic competitor. Underworld Corp, or Cerberus Inc., or something that otherwise connects to Hades that would give Olympus a run for its money. Oh, maybe even Pomegranate, Twisted Wonderland's new Apple equivalent that's got a bit less green and a bit more pizzazz. Well, whatever name Idia decides on will likely be good, and whatever company he decides to run in the tech sphere will no doubt be super successful, so that's where I see him landing. Now, Ortho. I see Ortho becoming the director of Styx for a couple different reasons. The first is that I think he'd want Idia to be freer and to be able to live his life a bit more. One of the many reasons that Idia refuses to really interact with others is because of this impending doom of the directorship. So if that's taken off the table, then Idia won't necessarily have to live at Styx forever. Ortho, however, is an AI who will live for as long as his technology can be updated. And he can also upload his data into various other electronics, so as long as there is competent engineers on site, he can continue to receive upgrades and therefore continue to live. So spending time as director isn't as big a deal for him. Secondly, Ortho would be able to better maintain relationships with the various countries and leaders the world over, given his brighter, bubbly spirit. Also, since he's near immortal, he can hang out with Malleus and improve relationships with the Briar Valley, which is a huge win given how the relationship used to be prior to Book 7. And thirdly, I don't know that Idia is going to continue the bloodline, and if he doesn't, there will be no one else but Ortho to take on this mantle. In Lilia's Suitor Suit vignette, we get to hear Idia's current thoughts on marriage, and they are not conducive to the existence of future Shroud children. Couple that with the blood curse, his introverted nature, and general attitude towards anyone outside of his family, and it's not quite so hopeful. Styx provides an essential service in this world, so I can't imagine it going away. But if there is no one capable of leading it, things could become disastrous. But that's where Ortho comes in, isn't it? So this will be his job in my version of events. Malleus now, of course, is going to be the king of the Briar Valley, but he's also going to get a doctorate in architecture with a specialized focus of gargoyles, which may not be a real thing, but it's gonna be a real thing in my universe. I'm not entirely sure how practical this degree itself would be for his reign, but I think it would be good for him to get generically since it will require him to go to school for a few more years, meaning he's got a few more years to learn about humans and make friends. And he's likely to find other folks who love gargoyles too while pursuing this major, which I think would be great for him. Maybe he could even expand his Gargoyle Studies Club into an official organization that focuses on the conservation and preservation of ancient buildings, specifically their gargoyles. I don't know, but all the possibilities make me smile, and I think this opportunity would be great for Malleus. There's even a chance that he could make contacts with folks from other countries, maybe even some diplomatic ones, which could help him with his primary duties anyway. So a king with his gargoyle fixation becoming something a little bit more practical, I think could work out great for him and the Briar Valley too. Lilia now is going to be the world's best grandpa. Yes, grandpa. Because while I don't think he'd be the pressuring type, he absolutely would welcome and subsequently spoil a little one. Malleus eventually presumably will have to have an heir, so Lilia at least is guaranteed that, assuming he survives, which at this point in time is not likely. But the book 7 hasn't finished in EN yet, so who knows what might happen. And this is my proposed future, so in it Lilia will get to be a true peepa. That, and I think he'd also have an antique shop where he could chit-chat with patrons and tell his wild stories while also potentially liquidating some of his stuff. I don't think Lilia is a hoarder per se, but his room at school is chock full of things that he's accumulated. Even papers he likely should have thrown out a while ago. So I can imagine him being someone who gathered a lot of miscellaneous things over time. What better way to share his stories and the joy these items have brought than to sell them in a little shop by the roadside? Weary travelers, bargain hunters, and folks of all kinds would be welcome to peruse his wares or even just stop in for tea. I don't see Lilia being picky either way, but I do think it's a pastime that he would enjoy, and it would get him more coin with which to spoil his newest grandkiddos, so it's a win-win. So aside from potentially being a father, Silver is going to be a world peace negotiator in whatever form that takes. Perhaps he's a consultant for royal families or for nations or maybe just for the Briar Valley, but I think given his desire to create a world where all manner of being can coexist despite their differences, Silver's gotta have a job that lets him pursue this goal. Maybe being one of Malleus's royal guards would let him do this, but I think he needs to be in a bit more of a diplomatic role to really enact change. I don't know how to bolster this point outside of those expressed desires from Silver, though. And unless Silver was some sort of consultant, I think it would be hard to have income and support oneself in this sort of pursuit. But I do think this is the most appropriate route for him to go, as I don't think he'd be content to be like a horse whisperer or a humane pest control person. And I think the skills he's learned through his guardsman training would be beneficial in this role too. Even though Silver's centered around peace, sometimes you must hammer the point home with a bit more force than you initially anticipate, and his training will have been perfect for that scenario. Maybe an ambassador role makes more sense as an actual career path than world peace negotiator, but that's the sentiment his work would have, so that's what I'm giving him here. Sebek, though, is absolutely, unequivocally going to be the world's best royal guardsman. I have no doubt that he will obtain and succeed in this role, as his life up until now has been entirely dedicated to serving Malleus. I don't think any other career would suit him, and I cannot envision him becoming a dentist like his dad. I just cannot fathom it. Sebek's special magic developed as a result of his desires to serve Malleus. All of his training has been in service of Malleus. All he ever talks about is Malleus. In every conceivable past and future, there is only Malleus. Sebek's life has been exclusively about the dragon, so it stands to reason that the rest of his life would be too. And boy howdy is he gonna be good at it. Technically he's already kind of become an official guard, if only in Lilia's dream, but if the Bar of the past recognized his skills, then I think the guards now will also recognize him too, and he will be the best of them, guaranteed. So that's where I see everyone's future heading post-graduation, but this was only a career fair, which by its very nature is just an opportunity to explore such avenues. But until the future becomes the past, we'll never know for sure where the boys will go. But I am curious about where you would have placed these guys and what you envision their futures to be. Let me know your thoughts down below, and while you're there, let me know if you liked this video and want more content like it. If comments aren't your thing, you could always let me know with a like or a subscribe. And as always, I do just need to remind you that you're amazing, and I hope you have a wonderful day.